Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Hello again and welcome back. We continue the story of our journey through the madness of the 1950s and 60s London gangster scene, when me and my brother Ron ran the East End and other parts of the capital with fear. Some of the people around me at this time in my criminal career were men held in great respect. Many of them were fascinating storytellers about their own experience. I often used to meet one called Herb in a London hotel. We would sit and have a coffee while he told me fascinating tales. Sometimes I would get to the hotel early to join him for breakfast, and he would sit at the table wearing an immaculate white satin dressing gown of short length. One of the nicest people it has been my pleasure to meet was a man of respect whose first name was Joe. His city was Washington, D.C. He was a classy dresser, very mild-mannered, and wore smart tinted glasses. His fingernails were manicured to perfection, and he wore expensive jewelry without being ostentatious. Charlie, Ron, and I would meet Joe and his charming wife at the Hilton Hotel on regular occasions. He had come up through the ranks and was now recognized as a top man within the family. At one time, in his younger days, he had been convicted of knifing a man to death during a backstreet dice game. Another of our visitors was Tony Ducks Carrillo. He is now serving 100 years in a prison somewhere in America after being convicted of extortion. Tony was born in Brooklyn and was the main man in the garment industry. Tony was short and very thick-set, had a broken nose and a strong Brooklyn accent, and while he came across as a good person, at the same time, he was not someone to mess with. During the mid-1950s, he came to London and stayed in a flat in the Bayswater area, where he asked us to visit him so we could talk of things in general. They had also invited Tony Muller to join them, but Tony did not show up, and Tony Carrillo was not at all happy with him for this lack of respect. We were invited to go and see Tony Carrillo and be his guests in Brooklyn whenever we wanted to, and he said he would show us around New York. Much to my regret, we did not make the journey, though Ron did go to New York years later. There was among these people one by the name of Skinny, who lived in an old precinct building in New York. Others told me that although he was very frail in build, he really used to put the fear into people. At one time, there was a world heavyweight fight champion who had not carried out instructions he had been given by the family. He was invited for a talk with Skinny in his car. They drove around the block a couple of times, and what was said isn't known. But when the boxer finally got out of the car, he was shaking so much that he could hardly stand. I relate this story to show that men of violence come in all shapes and sizes and are not necessarily big men physically. Little Joe was from New York, and when he passed away recently, all the men of respect were genuinely sad. Joe was born without a cent and had risen through the ranks to become a man of respect and wealth. He always remembered his days of hunger and would give precious gifts freely to his friends. Just a few years ago, my brother Ron received a beautiful gold ring with diamonds, which Joe had sent to him at Broadmoor, all the way from New York. Eddie the Sicilian was another man of respect Ron and I were lucky enough to encounter. He had contacts all over the world in gambling, show business and fights. Eddie visited London in the mid-1960s, and during that time, Charlie, Ron and I made him welcome as our guest. He stayed in one of the best hotels in London, and we would meet in his room before taking him on a tour of the city for late drinking sessions. There was a large radiogram in his room, and he insisted on keeping it on while we discussed business, so that the music would drown out any conversation if the room was bugged. Perhaps his paranoia was well-founded, as Eddie was shot dead by 2 hit men in New York in his 40s. In the 1960s, there was a connected family in Brooklyn who had become infamous over the years and were portrayed as the gangsters of that era. They were the Gallo family, led by Crazy Joe Gallo and his brothers Larry and Al. Crazy Joe had become a legend because of his wild exploits and behavior. He had been kicked out of the army, having been classified as a psychopath, which perhaps went some way to explaining his nickname. He also kept a tiger in a cage in the basement of his house, and if he was upset with anyone, he would show them the tiger and threaten to chuck them in the cage. At one time, Crazy Joe heard that Billy Daniels, the singer who had made the song, that Old Black Magic famous, had been dating one of his girlfriends, a good-looking air hostess. He had taken Billy to see the ferocious tiger, and it was said that forever after, Billy Daniels never looked at an air hostess again, other than to order a quick gin and tonic. Larry and Al Gallo were also more than capable when it came to handling problems and people, but were considered mild in comparison with their brother Joe. Crazy Joe was eventually shot dead while dining in a restaurant in the area of Little Italy in New York, but he had managed to follow the 3 hit men as far as the pavement outside the restaurant before he collapsed and died in the gutter. When Ron first went to New York, he and Joe Kaufman went to a small cafe situated in the Little Italy area. Outside the cafe, they were met by Edmondo, who was a dwarf and a mascot of the Gallo family, and their friend Tony Punchy Iliano. My brother Ron, who had no fear of people or situations, had gone to the cafe to seek out and introduce himself to Crazy Joe and his brothers. Edmondo showed Ron and Joe Kaufman inside and asked them to sit down at a table and wait while he went into the kitchen area of the cafe to make a phone call. A few minutes later, a group of people encircled Ron and Joe Kaufman, and one of these was Punchy Iliano. He asked Ron and Joe a few questions so he could check out their credentials. Eventually, after Punchy had checked them out, Al Gallo arrived on the scene and met Ron and Joe. Ron was told that Crazy Joe was not available, he was away on business, and Larry Gallo was in hospital dying of cancer. Ron arranged, as a sign of respect, to send Larry a basket of fruit. On his return, Ron made plans for Tony to be our guest in London, but this never came about because a little while after this, Ron and I were sentenced to life imprisonment. The legal system actually broadened our horizons at times, of course. In the year 1959, I had just been sentenced to 18 months in prison for demanding money with menaces. This despite the fact that I was completely innocent of the charge. I was sitting on a wooden bench below the court of the Old Bailey when the screws opened the door and escorted in a man who had also just been convicted. He introduced himself to me as Carmelo Messina of the infamous Messina family. He was short in height, swarthy, and was very polite. His birthplace was Malta, and Carmelo and his brothers were well known for running a call girl racket in central London during the 1950s. The family became multimillionaires through this. Carmelo told me that on his conviction, he was innocent, and the police from West End Central Police Station had convinced a prostitute to give false evidence against him, saying that she paid Carmelo from her immoral earnings, and on her word alone, he had been sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. I couldn't take his protestation of innocence very seriously, as the family business was an open secret, but I could sympathize with the method used to catch him. He was an interesting person, and when we arrived at Wandsworth Prison, I asked a few people to watch out for him, because though I disliked Ponce's, I looked upon Carmelo in a different light. He told me that living off the earnings of a woman was not considered immoral in his home country of Malta. Whichever way one looked at the Messina family, they were professional in the way they chose to make a living. Many years later, around 1967, Ron and I received a message from Carmelo saying if we could travel to Malta, he and his family had a proposition to put to us. This showed me that he had not forgotten my presence in those dreary days spent in Wandsworth. Ron and I never made the trip because sometime later we were arrested, which led to my present predicament. The Messina name has a place in the annals of professional crime and a place in my memory of the colourful 1950s and 1960s. And today, I still wonder what proposition Carmelo and his family had in mind. Living as they did in one of London's worst areas, East End men were tough, hard, and took no nonsense from anyone, particularly authority. Ronnie and I grew up among such people. You either fought or you went under, and my family was no different. My grandfathers on both sides were tough fighting men, and I've even seen Grandma Lee upend a man for treating her with disrespect. Uncle Joe was no villain, but he could have a fight when necessary and even went up against the Sabini mob in his younger days. Our father wasn't a fighter, but he carried a disdain for authority all his life, something that rubbed off on his boys. Our lives were populated with villains and those on the edge of villainy. It was the norm rather than the exception. I feel as though I've been fortunate in having been acquainted with this breed of men, almost all of them villains, whose like will never be seen again, because the East End has changed beyond recognition. No longer a breeding ground for poverty and disease, and now populated by a much more cosmopolitan crowd, it is completely different from the East End I grew up in. Though they lived on the wrong side of the law, those villains were as much part of the history of London as those whose fame is remembered in other areas. A record of these men, as I remember them, might help to paint a picture of the London scene during the 1950s and 60s. London was originally a collection of small villages that over the years became joined together. What remained, though, was the individuality of these areas, and each had its governor, hard men who ruled their manners with fists, knives and guns. When I was in my 20s, the man I wanted to emulate most of all was the former boss of London's underworld, Billy Hill. The prime reason for my admiration, apart from his ability to be very violent when necessary, was that he had a sharp and quick-thinking mind that appealed to me. It was just as well we didn't go up against him in the incident I mentioned earlier, as Ron and I became friends with him, and we were to learn a great deal about putting thoughts into action simply by observing how he handled different situations. One example concerns the time when Ron and myself, Charlie, and a mutual friend, Willie Malone, were at Valence Road. The telephone rang, and Ron took the call. It was Billy Hill, and he said, "Ron, will you come over to my flat as soon as possible?" Ron replied, "Okay, we're on our way." We each collected a gun from the bedroom, jumped in the motor outside, and drove to Bill's flat in Moscow Road in Bayswater. Arriving in less than 15 minutes, we knocked and were invited in. I said to Billy, "What's the trouble? We've brought some shooters." He just laughed and said, "Hang on there for a minute," and went into the bedroom. When he came back, he tossed a bundle containing £500 of brand new banknotes onto the table. "Take that few quid for your trouble and cut it up between you. I was only testing you to see how fast you get over here, or if you blank the emergency." This is just one instance of his great sense of humour and of his good thinking. time, two fellas and I went to the 21 Rooms in the West End. The 21 Rooms was owned by the Meadow Brothers and was one of the most exclusive clubs in London at the time. I believe it got its name from having 21 bedrooms. On this occasion, we were refused admittance by the two doormen dressed in tuxedos. I struck one of them on the chin, and as he hit the deck, my two friends applied the same treatment to his partner, who quickly joined him on the floor. I immediately thought we'd be arrested for grievous bodily harm. Due to the fact that one of the doormen may have recognized me, I also knew that Billy Hill procured a nice few quid out of the 21, so this sort of thing didn't happen. Even though it was the early hours, I decided that the best thing to do was to see Billy, confess and explain the situation. He was at home when we arrived and invited us in. I gave him my version of what had happened and asked him if he could find out if any charges were going to be brought against us. To my surprise, Billy was not the slightest bit perturbed that we had floored the doormen at the club. In fact, his reaction was quite the opposite. He telephoned the owner of the club and said, "This is Billy. I hear you've just had some trouble, so I'm ringing to let you know I've taken care of it. Leave everything to me." Ending his telephone conversation, Bill replaced the receiver and seemed very pleased with himself. He took a roll of notes out of his pocket, handed me £300 and said, "Take that few quid. It would have cost me a lot more to have arranged such a commotion to ensure my services are still necessary." The point he was making was that he had turned disadvantage to advantage, and the next day he would probably receive 5 grand from the owners for preventing any further incidents. The probability of this seemed highly unlikely, as such an exclusive establishment didn't attract much trouble. Still, 3 tough guys from the East End had presented Billy with just the opportunity he needed to extort a few more quid out of the Meadows brothers. This was a classic example of how Billy could weigh up a situation and turn it to his advantage. And that brings us to the end for this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.